According to the Warren Commission, which investigated the presidential assassination, Oswald killed Kennedy and Ruby killed Oswald. There was no conspiracy and just those two men involved. That at least is the official version of history. And this is what it looked like. It's November 24th. President Kennedy has been dead for 2 days. At the city courthouse, Lee Harvey Oswald, the man the Warren Commission later said was the lone assassin of President Kennedy, was brought in. For the next 48 hours, the Dallas police would question him. But despite the overwhelming amount of circumstantial evidence against him, Oswald continually denied everything. The police said, for instance, that this was the gun used. But did Oswald fire it? With each hour, the evidence against Lee Harvey Oswald mounted. Police said they were certain by now that he was the killer of the president. But again, Oswald steadfastly denied it. At the city courthouse where the alleged assassin Lee Harvey Oswald was being held, reporters besieged the police officials for more news.
Can you give us a resume of what you now know concerning the assassination of the president and Mr. Oswald's role in it?
There's only one thing that I can tell you without going into the evidence. Before first talking to the district attorney, I can tell you that this case is cinched, that this man killed the president. And there's no question in my mind about it.
Here comes Oswald down the hall again. You find that rifle? Just as fast as you people have been given, but I emphatically deny these charges.
In the Dallas Municipal Building, at almost exactly the same moment the president's body was being carried from the White House, police transferred his accused murderer from one jailhouse to another. A squad of detectives in Texas hats brought Lee Harvey Oswald down the elevator to the basement of the city courthouse. They were heading to an armored car for the trip to the county building. Oswald's hands were manacled, his face impassive. Then his guard and prisoner walked toward the car. From the right, a stubby figure in a gray hat dashed toward the prisoner. Oswald was shot in the stomach before his guards knew even what was happening. All hell broke loose. Watch that unbelievable, historic scene again, this time in slow motion. Oswald and his guards come out on the ramp. A radio reporter asks a question. Flashbulbs pop. The assassin dashes in and fires. The police threw themselves on the killer, later identified as Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner. An ambulance roared in. Oswald is taken fatally wounded to Parkland Hospital, the same hospital where President Kennedy had died 48 hours earlier. Oswald's killer, Jack Ruby, was taken to the Homicide Bureau for interrogation. The police already knew who he was. They knew that Ruby was often hot-tempered. But why had he made himself Oswald's judge, jury, and executioner? One central point in official history has always been the non-connection between Ruby and Oswald. The Warren Commission had concluded that they had never met. If, on the other hand, they did know each other, if there was some connection between them, that fact would lead support to the charges that there was a conspiracy to kill the president and that Ruby was part of it. Wally Weston is a comic and a nightclub master of ceremonies. He used to work in Dallas for a club called the Carousel. It was owned at the time by a man named Jack Ruby. Wally, welcome.
Hi.
Did you ever meet Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, I know now I did, yeah.
Well, tell me about that.
Well, I was working for Jack. This was approximately 3 weeks before the assassination of President Kennedy. And some guy walked into the audience, like, for example, there would be the front of the club, the entrance, and Jack usually stood on the door because Jack did his own bouncing. He didn't need a bouncer. He did it by himself.
He was a tough guy.
Not really, unless you got him upset. No. And Jack was very adamant about that. He would insist on people being quiet while I was working, and I was right in the middle of a story which had nothing to do with what this guy said, because he walked like right down like where he is, all right? And he points up and said, "You're a communist. I believe you're a communist."
Was he drunk when he said that?
No, no, that's the way he talked. You know, and I, naturally, everyone else in the audience, like the rest of them here, thought it was part of the act. But Jack knew it was not part of the act. And Jack had started to move toward him at the time, and then I went back into the story, and he kept it up. You know, he said, "I still say you're a communist." So by that time, I jumped off the stage, and he pulled back to hit me, and I pulled back at the same time, and he missed, and I didn't. You know, I hit him on the jaw.
You hit the heckler on the jaw.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Well, Jack was right behind him then, because he was coming this way. And when I hit him, like, Jack caught him under the arms. And he said, "You son of a bitch, I told you to never come in here again." And when it was over, I introduced another act, and I went back to Jack, and I said, "Jack," I said, "who is this?" He said, "Just forget about it." He said, "The guy's a jerk." He said, don't pay any attention to it."
Let me stop you there, Wally. Did you think, by what Jack said to you, what Jack said to the heckler, that he knew who the person was?
Well, I mean, otherwise, why would he say, I told you don't come back in here again? If he had never seen him before, how the hell is he going to tell him not to come in again?
Okay, at what point did you think that you recognized that person as Lee Harvey Oswald?
Not until maybe 5 days later, when I had seen his face enough on television. Because the only other time I had seen him was when Jack shot him, when I was, as a matter of fact, waiting for a call from Jack that morning. And it never came, you know, because he was at the city jail and I wasn't. And
how sure are you, Wally?
Of what?
That was Lee Oswald.
Oh, I know that it was, because that, you see, I've had a long time to think, and...
Are you sure that with time you haven't painted your own mind picture?
No. I mean, if it was anyone else, he would certainly come forward now and say, "Hey, it was me." Because the cat I punched is dead.
Did you ever speak with Jack after he was arrested for the murder of Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, I was one of the first people that Jack asked to see. So I would ask Jack, I said, "Jack, what's wrong?" He said, "I don't know what they're doing to me." He said, "All I know is they give me a lot of tests and they give me a lot of injections." He said, "I don't feel good. I can't eat." He said, "I feel like I'm going to die."
He died?
Yeah.
Did he ever tell you anything about Cuba?
Yes, on one of the visits, just one of the last visits that I made to Jack. And this was after he had been getting all those tests and all those injections. He said to me, he said, "Wally," he said, "now they're going to find out about everything. They're going to find out about my trips to Cuba, they're going to find out about my trips to New Orleans, and they're going to find out about the guns. They're going to find out about everything." Now, those are his exact words.
Okay, well, I want to stop you there. Wally says, as you heard, that Ruby knew Oswald. Others insist that Ruby did not know Oswald. Eva Grant is Jack Ruby's sister, and she'll be with us right after these commercial messages. Jack Ruby was born in Chicago in 1911. He was one of 9 children. The family was close-knit, but Jack was particularly close to his older sister, Eva. During World War II, Eva moved to Dallas and began managing restaurants and nightclubs. Jack joined her there in 1947, and they lived and worked together on and off until that weekend in November 1963. Eva, welcome. Welcome to Good Night
Good
America.
evening. I've turned down many programs. I just felt that everyone is writing a book and has something to say. I want to read something off right now. 4 days after our dear president was assassinated, Wally Weston's testimony is right here. And in here it says, there was another comedian who thought he saw Oswald in the club during a period there. But Wally says, how couldn't he see it? The lights were so bright you couldn't recognize anybody in the audience. I have here different things that will prove. Mr. Western and his wife were institutionalized in Dallas, Texas for habitual drinking.
Cool it. Listen to what she has to say.
This is the man who said Oswald was up there. Now let me tell you about the nightclub business. There is the stage, a round ring, and a little aisle, and my brother had him packed within 7 or 8 or 9 feet. If he could jump off the stage to anybody, he'd have to jump 15 feet. What Wally gave the article to the paper never happened. He's looking for publicity. He's been broke, out of a job, on and off in the last few years. All these people, I have some more from different people that said,
Eva, let me
Jack,
just... Okay.
Jack was always a distance, that's just one time. Jack was always a distance from the stage. If he could hit anyone in the audience or standing up and fall into Jack's arm, he'd have to go behind the lights where Jack was always turning that wheel that arranges the lights. It never happened, believe me. Everyone, these people, you can write to them, you can call them, I have their phone numbers. He thinks he's Fanny Fox or Elizabeth Ray.
Wally? I'll give you 30 seconds to respond. Your credibility has been impeached, if you haven't noticed.
Are you ready? I was as close to him as I am to you.
She says, Wally, that you've been broke over the last couple of years and that this might be a publicity ploy to generate some income. How do you respond to that?
If I wanted to do this, if I needed to capitalize on this, I would have done it 13 years ago when everyone was jumping on the gravy train, so to speak. I have nothing to gain from this. As a matter of fact, as you know, I don't even know how much I'm getting for this show, and I could care less. All I know, which is more than I was getting from Jack. All I know is that what I say is completely true.
Excuse me, Wally. To the best of your knowledge, Eva, did Jack ever go to Cuba?
Oh yeah, 58 or 59. Louis McWillie was moving from there because it got hot. I've forgotten the year. If you remember...
It was 1959.
Right, okay. So he says, send Jack a round-trip ticket. He says, help me pack and get my stuff back.
Do you know that Jack sent guns to Louis McWillie?
Now, I want to tell you about guns. My brother bought 4 guns in his life that I know. Alice Nichol, the girl, in 1959 or 60, there was a very bad situation in Dallas. I don't want to discuss what went on, but women were afraid. I could tell you that privately. Color guy was out to get a lot of white women. How can I... Anyway, he bought Alice a gun. He had a gun. He bought me a gun. He sent a gun. Before McWillie came back, he didn't know if he's going to stay on because there was a situation with Batista and Castro. They didn't know who's going to be in power. Jack sent him a gun COD that he paid $125. Never came back. The man, Ray Brantley, who owns that gun shop, says, well, McWillie always bought hunting guns. He says, I don't know about the gun. He says he bought a gun.
What do you know about McWillie, Eva?
He's a gambler.
Do you know that the Warren Commission called him a gambler and a murderer?
Oh, that I did. I don't know where you read it. I didn't read it in my...
Volume 23, page 166.
Listen, I thought, well, I have to remember that. I didn't meet him but one time, and...
What was Jack doing associated with these people in Havana, Cuba?
They come into the club. Look, when you're a nightclub owner, you don't go to everyone in their background who owns a butcher shop or who's in the hotel business. I know one thing. What? My brother, had my brother done anything against this country, members of the family would say rot, but we knew Jack. We know how he loved Kennedy. And in his way of moderation, I mean, he used to make me put the television in my club, the Vegas club, on the bar and tell Joe, the band leader, not to play, disconnect the jukebox. Most of the people enjoyed it. They had a chance to think. The band was always very loud. The jukebox is loud. And the press had been on for about almost an hour. But I had to do it. My brother would give me orders. It was really his club, but I will...
Let me ask you this, Eva. Your brother and you had a very close relationship. Is it possible that he was involved in these activities, and because of his love for you, he just never told you?
I knew... I'm going to tell you something, and I don't care if everyone hears it. I never knew which girl he slept with. Just a few, when they annoyed me, I could tell. But everything else I knew about my brother. And another thing, there's another station I'm not going to mention the state, has an hour on Sunday. They had two homosexuals on. One said, you know, Jack came with $25,000 to buy ammunition. And if you don't believe me, ask my friend. And that friend there, I wish you had seen him. It was a Laurie and Hardy team. This situation isn't funny to me. But I'll tell you, I laughed and cried. If I could get a hold... I laughed and cried because they had the guts.
Eva, wait a second.
And my brother never had $25,000 in his life.
Okay, wait a second. He sent 4 guns to Louis McWilliams. Well, let me finish. Let me finish.
He said one
Let me
gun.
finish it.
He bought 4 different...
He bought 4, he sent 1 gun.
No, they were bought different times. That's what the record showed.
Okay.
But my
he
brother,
sent a gun to Louis McWillie in
That's
Havana,
different.
Cuba.
Right.
Louis McWillie knew John Roselli, the mafia hood hired by the CIA to assassinate Fidel Castro.
You know what's going to happen?
What?
Everyone that knew Jack Ruby went around killing people. If there a lot of people probably knew that man. You know what? I never heard of him. Would you believe it?
I believe anything you tell me.
No, I never heard of him. I heard that they found him in a bushel of, or a barrel of oil or something.
Right. He was stabbed, his throat was cut, and his hand were tied around his... Well, anyway. There's obviously a dispute here between Eva and Wally.
No, I want to tell you, this man has been out of work. Everyone that knows him, he's been institutionalized.
She's pointing to him, not me.
No.
I've been working very hard.
All right. The Warren Commission, he hasn't been there since September. It's right in there.
Okay, Eva, don't get excited. I want to thank... No, I think that you both had your chance.
Do I get equal time?
You've had equal time.
Well,
it wouldn't do any good, Wally. In a moment, we'll be joined by Watergate burglar and ex-CIA operative Frank Sturgis.
That's not fair, man.
What do you want to say? Go ahead. Most of you know Frank Sturgis is one of the 5 men caught burglarizing the Democrats in the Watergate building. It's hard to believe, but that was almost 4 years ago. In any case, Mr. Sturgis is now on parole after serving over 14 months in jail for his part in that crime. And since 1972, we've learned something about his extraordinary career prior to the Watergate break-in. During the late 50s, he was one of Fidel Castro's right-hand men, first as an intelligence officer, and later as a minister in the Castro government. At about that same time, Mr. Sturgis was recruited by the CIA and became, in effect, a double agent, working for Castro. That was the ostensible job, working also for the CIA on the sly. Mr. Sturgis, welcome. Several weeks ago, you made some statements concerning Jack Ruby that caused quite a stir. You said, in effect, that Mr. Ruby had visited Castro and met with other Cuban officials. The topic of their discussion was the elimination of President Kennedy. I want you to tell me exactly what you know about that alleged meeting.
The information that I have received over the past several months pertaining to a meeting in Havana, and at this meeting, Fidel Castro was present, his brother Raul Castro, Che Guevara was present, an Argentine woman was present, another officer by the name of El Mexicano was present, who, by the way, is an American citizen. Another Cuban officer was present, also Jack Ruby. At this meeting, there was a discussion about guns, the sale of guns, possibly drugs, and in return for that, the elimination of the President of the United States.
You don't have first-hand knowledge. You didn't see Jack Ruby at that meeting, true or false?
I did not see Jack Ruby at that meeting.
At any meeting that you were personally involved in now, Frank, was there a discussion of the assassination or the elimination or the attempted murder of the President of the United States?
I was at several meetings with Castro. And at one of the meetings with Castro, it was discussed that he, as soon as his government is well established, that he was going to run American businesses out of Cuba, especially the gambling casinos. And we discussed counter-revolutionaries that were the United States.
What did you interpret that to mean?
A threat.
A threat to do what?
Against the officials, American government.
Say it.
I just did.
To murder the President of the United States?
Well, I wouldn't exactly say that, but basically that was the idea.
Well, was it or was it not?
It was.
Are you saying that Castro could possibly have been the catalyst behind the assassination of President Kennedy?
I made statements to the Rockefeller Commission, to the Schweiker Committee, that I believed, with what I know, and I'm sorry I couldn't actually tell you everything that I told the committee, that I believe that there was a conspiracy, Americans involved in the conspiracy, plus several countries who were aware and also involved in this conspiracy that killed the President of the United States.
Were you involved in that conspiracy, Frank?
Myself, no.
Do you know that there have been allegations that Castro was not involved and that it came from the intelligence community of the United States, frustrated and bitter because President Kennedy, after the Bay of Pigs, the abortive invasion, the Bay of Pigs, that fiasco, pulled back the CIA and pulled back people like yourself and said, no more counter-revolutionary activities in Cuba, that bitterness generated an assassination attempt on the President's life. How do you respond to those charges?
There was bitterness, but I doubt very much whether a federal intelligence organization in the United States would involve themselves with killing the President of the United States.
Where were you on November 22nd, 1960?
In Miami, Florida, at home.
And who will tell us that that, in fact, is true?
Well, there's proof.
Did you know Louis McWillie?
I believe I met Louis McWillie in Havana. There was a time at the early part of 1959 where Castro, when he came over to the Air Force Base, where he needed, he asked me really to take charge of the gambling casinos for the Cuban government.
So while you were a CIA agent, you were also Minister of Gambling for Castro?
That's correct.
So you knew Louis McWillie?
I knew a number of the people who were in control of the
Specifically, did you know him, Louis McWillie, Jack Ruby's friend?
I really couldn't swear to it, but I believe I have met Mr.
He was the
McWillie.
manager of the Tropicana Club.
I met him, yes.
Did you ever meet Jack Ruby?
No, I don't believe so.
What do you think about, we have stories now that there were two men hired by CIA operatives, John Roselli and Sam Giancana, two mafia hoods. They were hired by the U.S. government to assassinate Fidel Castro. Did you know anything about those two men, Frank?
No.
Do you think that their deaths within a year of each other were related?
Well, there's two possibilities. One, the Cuban intelligence organization probably sent agents to kill him. They have that much power. To prove that, it's on record in the United States government that Castro did send Mexican agents to the United States to kill myself and also the ex-chief of the Cuban Air Force who came into exile, which I arranged his escape from Cuba. So Castro is capable of killing people. He's done it in South America.
And your theory is that he was behind the assassination?
No, it's not my theory. I think the facts are there. The evidence is there with testimony that I have given and certain facts that Fidel Castro was behind, involved in a conspiracy to kill the President of the United States. Plus, Russia's KGB was aware, possibly involved in this conspiracy to kill the President of the United States.
Okay. Frank, we have run out of time, unfortunately. On a program like this, everything gets compressed. I want to thank you for joining us. I must add, in all frankness and honesty, that you are a convicted burglar, that your credibility has to be impeached because of your own prior activities involved in, as a double agent. We don't know if you're a triple agent or a quadruple agent or anything else. I want to still thank you for coming on and for telling your theory on what happened.
My pleasure.
We have an exclusive interview with Lee Harvey Oswald's mother in Fort Worth, Texas. That comes right after this. Thank you again. Newsman Dan Rather once said that Lee Harvey Oswald's mother, Marguerite, may well be the Martha Mitchell of this case, and it's true. Once she gets started, Mrs. Oswald becomes a zealot, vigorously defending a son that she insists was a patsy, a fall guy, framed for the murder of the president by powerful people in high places. I visited Mrs. Oswald at her home in Fort Worth, Texas. She's devoted her entire life to the cause of her son's innocence, and she exists now on a combination of Social Security and whatever fees she can earn either selling autographs or speaking about the Kennedy assassination. Did your son, in your opinion, kill President Kennedy?
I don't have an opinion whether Lee killed President Kennedy or not. I happen to know my son was framed. I have stated so in my testimony. I've spoken out for 13 years. And so I find your question very upsetting.
Over the last several years especially, there have been reports that your son was actually an agent for one of the intelligence agencies here in the United States, the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, something like that. What do you think about that theory?
Well, yes, when Lee went to Russia, I thought then, which was in 1959, I thought then, and just for the fact that he had showed up in Russia. But immediately then thinking about everything, I was convinced that he was sent to Russia. And I made a personal trip to Washington, D.C. in 1960 and said so then. And I think this hurt me very, very much at the time of the assassination, when everybody was so emotionally upset and we had such news and everything, and of course it was such a big, big thing. Well, if I said anything, people thought, oh, that's a mother taking up for her son. And so now I'm going to say to the public, no, in 1960, 3 years prior to that, I had already been to Washington, and I said then, if my son is an agent in the United States, I want to know it, and I think he belongs home. I had the audacity to say that. And 6 weeks later, I received notice from the State Department giving me his address. But up until that time, I didn't know whether Lee was alive or dead for 20 months. And I had been in correspondence with the State Department. They couldn't locate my son. They didn't know a thing about my son. But when I made my personal trip to Washington, D.C., 6 weeks later, I get his address and saying he wants to come home. Now that, to me, clinches. That doesn't prove anything, let's say, but after all, you do have circumstantial evidence, and this is what they base my son's allegedly killing the president on, circumstantial evidence. They built a case against him. Well, I can also build a case.
In an interview that you gave to a newspaper in December of 1963, about 2 weeks after the assassination, you said that the FBI came to you approximately 17 hours prior to the murder of your son by Jack Ruby and showed you a picture of a man that later you identified as Jack Ruby.
The night before, an FBI, Mr. Bart Odom, came to the motel where Marina and I were staying, and they wanted to talk with Marina, and I wouldn't let them because she had been on a terrible strain. After all, her baby was just a few weeks old. And I asked him what it was, what can I do for them. And he had a picture couple in his hand, and he asked me if I knew this man. And I said, no, I've never seen this man in my life before, believe me. And off he went. And then after Ruby killed Lee, and remember, I didn't know who killed Lee, I walked through a room where we were held in protective custody by the Secret Service, and I casually turned over a newspaper, and on the front page, the whole bottom of the page, was a picture of a man. And I said, that's the man, that the picture the FBI man showed me. And they said, Miss Oswald, that's the man who killed your son.
This is an extraordinary room. I wonder if you'd tell us about it.
All of these books on the assassination are favorable to my son, Lee Harvey Oswald. While some of them are sensationalism, most of them, and all of them, I would say, have some truth in it. And the truth is because these authors do have the 26 volumes. They do know the documentation. But where they err is the evaluation of such, and that is where the commission members erred. All of the hearsay, the opinions, the assumptions, and the false documents, because there are many, came to the conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone assassin. They are wrong. I have said they were wrong in my testimony. I have yelled they were wrong for 13 years, and I stand here before you today saying they are wrong in their final analysis. And what is that analysis? That analysis is, according to the Warren report, that Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald alone killed the President of the United States. I, Margaret Oswald, say they are wrong.
A few weeks ago, a mafia hood named John Roselli was found strangled, stabbed, and stuffed into a 55-gallon oil drum floating in Biscayne Bay in Florida. Roselli was one of the 2 hitmen recruited by the CIA in 1960 to kill Fidel Castro. The other would-be assassin, a hood named Sam Giancana, was murdered a year ago. The relationship between those deaths, how they were tied into the CIA, and the possible connection this all may have with the Kennedy assassination are some of the questions I'll be asking my next guest, columnist Jack Anderson. That's right after this. Our next guest is an extraordinary journalist, an intrepid investigator, and a colleague of mine on the Good Morning America program, Jack Anderson. Now, 5 years before it was reported by the Senate subcommittee, Jack was the first person to break the story of the attempted use of mafia henchmen by U.S. government officials to knock off foreign heads of state. Jack's been in Kansas City covering the Republicans for ABC. Jack, thank you very much for being with us this evening. What was the response to that story when you first broke it 5 years ago?
Geraldo, it was too much to swallow. It was too big a story to believe. The idea that our government would use mafia people, even though we named the mafia people, even though we named their CIA contact, it was more than people could believe. It took 5 years to get a reaction.
So, in other words, it just didn't take off then? People just didn't buy it 5 years ago?
They couldn't believe it.
Now we've just seen first Sam Giancana. He's killed. Then John Roselli, found floating in a 55-gallon drum in Biscayne Bay, strangled, stabbed, hands tied behind his back. It looks like a mob rub-out. But both these men have had some connection to these allegations that we're speaking about. Could you explain possibly how their deaths were related, Jack?
Well, it's just a strange coincidence. You have the 2 mafia plotters, as you say, Sam Giancana and John Roselli, but you also have their CIA contact, William Harvey, who died from a massive heart attack, and he had no history of heart attacks. So you've got the 3 leading characters dead. Well, why? Is there some relationship? I just don't know.
Is there any possible connection between their deaths and the JFK assassination?
Again, there's certainly no evidence, but the story is a strange one. It's a story of coincidence, but it's a story that simply can't be shaken aside, Geraldo. It began back in 1960 when our government was plotting the Bay of Pigs incident. They decided that they didn't want to have Fidel Castro leading the Cubans. They thought that if they could knock him off, if they could eliminate him, if the Cubans would lose their charismatic leader, that the invaders would have a better chance. That's how it all started. And so the 2 mafia men, Roselli and Giancana, were recruited by the CIA to do the dirty work. They made 6 different assassination attempts, even after the Bay of Pigs failed. They continued, the project had its own momentum, and they continued to try to knock off Fidel Castro. The last attempt was in March of 1963. Then the mafia people were just told to forget about it. And the reason they were told to forget about it, we've now learned, is that the CIA had found someone better, someone closer to Cuba, to Castro, one of his close associates, a man by the name of Rolando Cubella. But Geraldo, Castro learned about it. And in September of 1963, he notified the Associated Press correspondent in Havana that he was going to have something important to say at the Brazilian embassy. I think this was September 7th. September 7th, 1963, Castro turned up at the Brazilian embassy, and he said that he knew that the Kennedys were plotting against him, and then he said very significantly, two can play at this game.
And this is 2 months before the Kennedy assassination.
Two months later, John F. Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald. Lee Harvey Oswald had close connections with the Castro movement. Shortly before he went to Dallas, he went to Mexico City and visited the Cuban embassy in Mexico City.
Frank Sturgis, Jack, has told us that Jack Ruby, the man who killed Lee Harvey Oswald, visited Cuba to discuss with Fidel Castro the assassination, the murder of John Kennedy. What do you think? I know that you've been associated, you've gotten information from Sturgis before, he's a CIA operative, we all know that. What about his credibility? Is he a credible person? Can we believe his allegations?
I've had dealings with Frank Sturgis since the Bay of Pigs. He has never given me any wrong information. There have been a time or two when I felt that it was a little exaggerated, but I've always been able to check out what he told me. I've never found him to be wrong. But as far as this story is concerned, I have not checked it out. I don't know whether it's true or not.
But you say he has a good track record.
He's had a good track record with me, I'd have to say that.
Do you know anything about a Ruby Oswald connection? Is it possible? We've had a man on the program, Wally Weston, a comic and an MC at the Carousel Club, Ruby's Carousel Club, who testified that Oswald had visited the club on at least 2 occasions and had spoken with Ruby. If they did know each other, of course, that would lead credence to the conspiracy theory. Do you know anything about that, Jack?
I've never been able to verify it. I cannot confirm it. I don't know whether it's true or not. I'm suspicious.
That there could be something going on.
I've read the statements. I have no reason to doubt them. At the same time, I have absolutely no proof, no confirmation that there was a connection.
In your experience, as time passes, do these things become more clear, or do they just get more obscured by the mists of time?
Well, people tend to weave legends, people tend to build myths, people tend to create their own aura, and sometimes, I think as time goes on, it becomes maybe even more difficult to separate the fact from the fiction.
Right. Thanks very much for being with us, Jack. Really, thank you very much. We'll be back. Good Night America continues with a final word right after this.
Good night, America, I love you. Good night, America, how are you?
There was a time not long before this time when we considered anyone who doubted the Warren Commission either an unbalanced paranoid or a wild-eyed radical troublemaker. After all, the government had investigated the death of the president. The government had concluded Lee Harvey Oswald was the lone assassin. The government had decided that Jack Ruby was the lone assassin of the lone assassin. And the government, after all, never told a lie. But that was 13 years ago. And in the space between that time and this, we've discovered that government is not immune from liars or cheats or scoundrels, or is government above hiring mafia hoods to attempt the murder of foreign heads of state whose politics happen not to be in tune with our own. So now that we've been burned by deceptions and criminal acts and cover-ups right at the top, we attempt a review of the confusing, incredible story of Kennedy's murder, a lot wiser and more skeptical than we were when the Warren Commission issued its report in 1964. Knowing what we know now of the never-ending coincidences, the interrelationships, the secret maneuverings of the secret agents, doesn't it become difficult to pretend any longer that Oswald and Ruby, 2 misfits, 2 failures, 2 total strangers acting only on their own impulse, with no help or encouragement from anybody else, could do this thing? It's so unlikely, so contrary to what we know about them and what we know about human nature that it becomes impossible to believe. To me, it's the least likely, the least possible of all the theories about what happened between November 22nd and November 24th, 1963. After watching this program and others like it, I think it's fair to say that most of the people in this room would agree with me, and perhaps many of you at home as well. But what happens now? What do we do now? Do I ask you all to send in postcards to your congressman? It wouldn't do any good. And at this point, I'm ready to agree with Jack Anderson. We'll probably never know who killed John Kennedy or why. Peace and good night, America.